In a small, lively town nestled in the heart of Massachusetts, there lived a young girl named Maria Rodriguez. Her life was far from luxurious, but it was filled with love and lessons that shaped her into the person she would one day become. Maria's father, Carlos, worked tirelessly as a janitor at Harvard University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. Though his job wasn't glamorous, Carlos took immense pride in keeping the university clean and ensuring that students and professors had a comfortable environment to learn and teach. What made Carlos special, however, was not just his work ethic, but also his passion for education. Carlos had always dreamed of attending college, but life had other plans for him. He came from a humble background in Mexico and moved to the United States seeking better opportunities. Despite never having the chance to pursue higher education himself, he believed deeply in its power to transform lives. This belief became the foundation of how he raised Maria. From an early age, Carlos encouraged Maria to read, explore, and ask questions about the world around her. Every evening after finishing his shift at Harvard, he would bring home discarded textbooks, journals, and notes left behind by students. These materials became treasures for Maria, opening doors to knowledge that seemed out of reach for someone like her. Maria devoured these books with insatiable curiosity. Whether it was science, history, or math, she found joy in every subject. Her favorite spot in their tiny apartment was a corner table where she spread out her books and notebooks, scribbling equations and jotting down ideas. It wasn't long before her teachers noticed her exceptional talent. By middle school, Maria was solving problems meant for high schoolers, and by high school, she was tackling college-level material. Yet, despite her brilliance, life wasn't easy for her. The town they lived in wasn't particularly kind to people who were different. Maria's worn clothes, hand-me-down shoes, and second-hand backpack marked her as an outsider. Some kids teased her relentlessly, calling her names and making fun of her family's financial struggles. Even some adults whispered behind her back, saying things like, "She'll never amount to much, look at where she comes from." But Maria refused to let their words break her spirit. Instead, she used them as fuel to push harder toward her dreams. Her father remained her biggest supporter. Whenever Maria felt discouraged, Carlos would sit beside her and remind her of something important. "Maria, you are smarter than anyone who underestimates you. Don't waste your energy hating them. Prove them wrong instead." His words stuck with her, becoming a mantra she repeated to herself during tough times. Together they dreamed of the day when Maria would walk through the gates of Harvard. Not as someone cleaning the halls, but as a student sitting in its classrooms. As Maria entered her senior year of high school, her hard work began to pay off. She applied to several universities, including Harvard, knowing full well that getting accepted would be nearly impossible without financial aid. The competition was fierce, and many applicants came from wealthy families with connections. Still, Maria poured her heart into her application essays. Sharing her story of resilience and determination, she wrote about how her father inspired her, how she overcame obstacles, and why she wanted to study at Harvard, to honor her roots while breaking barriers for others like her. Months went by, and the weight felt unbearable. Then, one crisp autumn morning, an envelope arrived in the mail. Maria's hands trembled as she opened it, her heart pounding with anticipation. Inside was a letter congratulating her on being awarded a full-ride scholarship to Harvard University. Tears streamed down her face as she ran to show her father. Carlos hugged her tightly, tears streaming down his own cheeks. They celebrated, quietly that night, knowing this was only the beginning of a challenging journey. When Maria shared the news with her classmates, reactions were mixed. Some were genuinely happy for her, impressed by her achievement. Others, however, couldn't hide their jealousy or disbelief. "How did she get into Harvard?" one boy muttered sarcastically during lunch. Another chimed in, "Probably just got lucky." Maria ignored their comments, focusing instead on preparing for the adventure ahead. She knew that proving herself wouldn't end with getting into Harvard. It was only the first step. On the eve of her departure, Maria sat alone, in her room, staring at the stack of books she'd collected over the years. Each one told a story of struggle, perseverance, and hope. She thought about all the sacrifices her father had made and how much faith he had in her. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel nervous. What if she couldn't keep up? What if people judged her because of where she came from? But then she remembered her father's advice. Prove them wrong. With renewed determination, Maria packed her bags, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Little did she know, her journey at Harvard would test her in ways she couldn't imagine. It would challenge her confidence, push her limits, and force her to confront prejudice head-on. Yet it would also give her the chance to shine brighter than anyone expected. A chance to show the world that intelligence and potential aren't defined by wealth or status, but by grit, courage, and an unyielding desire to succeed. And so, with her father's words echoing in her mind and her dreams lighting her path, Maria stepped onto the campus of Harvard University, unaware that her presence would soon leave an indelible mark on everyone she encountered, including a certain professor who would soon learn a lesson he'd never forget. Maria's first day at Harvard felt like stepping into another world. The campus was bustling with energy, filled with students chatting excitedly, professors rushing to their offices, and the distant hum of laughter echoing through the historic brick buildings. For Maria, it was overwhelming yet exhilarating. She clutched her schedule tightly in one hand, her notebook in the other, and took a deep breath as she navigated the winding paths lined with towering trees. Every step reminded her of how far she had come, and how much farther she still had to go. Her first class of the day was Advanced Mathematics, taught by none other than Professor Jonathan Whittemore. Whittemore was a name that carried weight at Harvard. Known for his sharp intellect and groundbreaking research in theoretical mathematics, he commanded respect from everyone around him. But there was another side to Whittemore, a side that many whispered about behind closed doors. He was notoriously arrogant, often dismissing students who didn't meet his impossibly high standards. Some admired his brilliance, others dreaded being in his presence, fearing his biting remarks and cutting critiques. As Maria approached the lecture hall, her nerves began to creep in. She hesitated outside the door, watching as groups of students filed inside, laughing and talking animatedly. They all seemed so confident, dressed in designer clothes and carrying expensive laptops. Maria glanced down at her own attire, a simple sweater and jeans, and felt a pang of self-consciousness. She pushed the thought aside, reminding herself why she was here. This wasn't about fitting in, it was about proving herself. When she finally entered the room, she chose a seat near the back, hoping to blend into the crowd. The lecture hall was large, with rows of desks sloping downward toward a massive whiteboard at the front. Students were already settling in, some typing furiously on their devices while others flipped through thick textbooks. Maria opened her notebook, smoothing out its pages and writing the date at the top. Her pen hovered over the paper as she waited for class to begin, her heart pounding with anticipation. A few minutes later, Professor Whittemore strode into the room, commanding attention without saying a word. Tall and imposing, he wore a tailored suit that screamed authority. His piercing eyes scanned the room, taking in each face before landing briefly on Maria's. She tried to focus on her notebook, but she couldn't shake the feeling that his gaze lingered on her longer than necessary. When he reached the podium, he cleared his throat and began speaking in a voice that was both commanding and condescending. "Good morning," he said, his tone clipped and formal. "Welcome to Advanced Mathematics. I trust you all know what you've signed up for. This course is not for the faint of heart. If you're here looking for an easy A, I suggest you leave now." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, but most students remained silent, intimidated by his words. Whittemore continued, launching into a brief overview of the syllabus and the expectations he had for the semester. Afterward, he paused and looked around the room. "Let's start with introductions," he announced. "I'd like to hear your names, your intended majors, and any relevant experience you might bring to this class." One by one, students introduced themselves, listing off prestigious internships, advanced coursework, and family legacies tied to academia. Each introduction seemed designed to impress, and Whittemore nodded approvingly at some while barely acknowledging others. When it was Maria's turn, she felt her stomach twist into knots. Slowly, she stood up, clutching her notebook like a lifeline. "Hi," she began softly, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Maria Rodriguez. I'm majoring in mathematics and, she faltered, unsure of what to say next. Unlike the other students, she didn't have flashy credentials or connections to boast about. All she had was her hard work and determination. But somehow those didn't feel adequate in this moment. "And what brings you to Harvard, Miss Rodriguez?" Whitmore asked, interrupting her hesitation. His tone was polite enough, but there was an edge to it that made her uneasy. Maria swallowed hard and forced herself to continue. "My father works here, as a janitor," she admitted, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. The room fell silent and Maria could feel dozens of eyes boring into her. Some students exchanged glances, smirking or raising eyebrows. Others simply stared, unsure of how to react. Whitmore tilted his head slightly, studying her with an unreadable expression. Then, in a voice just loud enough for everyone to hear, he muttered, "Ah, yes. Legacy admissions do come in many forms, don't they?" The comment was subtle, almost casual, but its meaning was clear. Maria froze, her face burning with shame. A few snickers broke out among the students, though most remained quiet, sensing the tension in the air. For a moment, Maria considered sitting back down and disappearing into the background. But something inside her refused to give in. Instead, she straightened her posture, squared her shoulders, and met Whitmore's gaze directly. "I earned my place here," she said firmly, her voice stronger now, "just like everyone else." The room went completely silent. Even Whitmore seemed taken aback by her boldness, though he quickly masked his surprise with a dismissive smirk. "Well, we'll see about that," he replied coolly, turning back to the board to write the day's topic. Maria sank back into her seat, her heart racing. She knew this wouldn't be the last time she faced judgment or ridicule, but she also knew she couldn't let it break her. If anything, Whitmore's comment only fueled her determination to prove him wrong. The rest of the class passed in a blur. Whitmore lectured on complex mathematical theories, filling the board with equations and symbols that danced across the surface. Most students scribbled notes furiously, trying to keep up with his rapid pace. Maria, however, found herself struggling more than she expected. The concepts weren't entirely foreign to her, but the speed at which Whitmore presented them left little room for reflection. By the end of the hour, her head was spinning and her notebook was filled with half-formed thoughts and incomplete calculations. As the students filed out of the lecture hall, Maria lingered behind, gathering her things, slowly. She replayed the events of the morning in her mind, cringing at the memory of Whitmore's comment and her classmates' reactions. Still, she reminded herself that setbacks were part of the journey. She had faced tougher challenges before, and she would face them again. What mattered was how she responded. On her way to her next class, Maria stopped by the library to review her notes. She sat at a quiet table, poring over the material from Whitmore's lecture and cross-referencing it with the textbooks she'd brought from home. Hours passed unnoticed as she worked, determined to master the concepts that had eluded her earlier. By the time she finally closed her books, the sun was setting, casting golden light through the library windows. That evening, as Maria walked back to her dorm, she reflected on the day's events. It hadn't been easy, and she knew there would be more difficult days ahead. But she also knew that every challenge was an opportunity to grow stronger. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a spark of defiance, a quiet confidence that told her she belonged here, no matter what anyone else thought. Little did Maria realize that her encounter with Professor Whitmore was only the beginning of a story that would unfold in ways she couldn't yet imagine. In the weeks to come, she would face moments of doubt, frustration, and triumph, all leading to a single defining moment when she would touch the whiteboard and leave an indelible mark on everyone who underestimated her. The weeks that followed Maria's first day at Harvard were a whirlwind of challenges. Balancing her coursework, part-time job, and personal life proved to be more demanding than she had anticipated. Every morning she woke up before dawn to clean dorms alongside her father, earning money to cover expenses the scholarship didn't account for. Afterward, she rushed to class, often skipping breakfast just to make it on time. By evening, she buried herself in textbooks, reviewing lectures and solving problems late into the night. Despite her relentless efforts, advanced mathematics remained her toughest hurdle. Professor Whitmore's lectures moved at lightning speed, leaving little room for questions or clarification. His teaching style was intimidating, focused, precise, and unyielding. He rarely paused to explain concepts in simpler terms, assuming his students already possessed a deep understanding of the material. For Maria, this approach felt alienating. She spent countless hours trying to catch up, poring over dense textbooks and scribbling notes until her hand cramped. Yet no matter how hard she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was falling behind. To make matters worse, Whitmore seemed to take particular notice of Maria during class. Whether intentional or not, his comments often singled her out. When a student struggled to answer a question, he would glance at Maria and say things like, "Perhaps someone who's less distracted can offer insight." Other times, when assigning group projects, he paired her with students who clearly resented having to work with her. These subtle jabs stung, but Maria refused to let them break her resolve. Instead, she channeled her frustration into determination, working twice as hard to prove she belonged. One crisp October afternoon, Maria walked into the lecture hall feeling unusually anxious. The air buzzed with anticipation as students settled into their seats, whispering about the upcoming session. Word had spread that Whitmore planned to present a particularly challenging problem, one so complex that even graduate students found it daunting. Rumors swirled that whoever solved it would earn extra credit, along with Whitmore's rare approval. As Maria took her usual spot near the back, she noticed several students exchanging nervous glances. Even the brightest minds in the room seemed uneasy. When Whitmore entered, the room fell silent. Without preamble, he strode to the whiteboard and began writing an equation filled with symbols and variables that twisted and turned across the surface. To most people, it looked like an indecipherable maze. Whitmore stepped back, folded his arms, and surveyed the room with a smug expression. "This is what we call a theoretical nightmare," he said dryly. "Anyone care to attempt a solution?" For several minutes, no one spoke. The silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. Some students fidgeted in their seats, avoiding eye contact, while others stared blankly at the board, hoping someone else would volunteer. Whitmore's gaze swept across the room, pausing briefly on various faces before landing squarely on Maria. A sly smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying a hint of mockery. "You've been rather quiet today. Perhaps you'd like to enlighten us? Or are you here merely to observe?" The comment drew a few snickers from nearby students, though many shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the unfairness of the situation. Maria clenched, her fists under the table, her pulse quickening. She knew exactly what Whitmore was doing. He wanted to embarrass her, to confirm his belief that she didn't belong in his class. But Maria wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her heart pounding, but her expression calm. Ignoring the murmurs around her, she walked to the front of the room and picked up the marker. For a brief moment, all eyes were on her, some curious, some skeptical, and some openly hostile. Whitmore leaned against the podium, watching intently, his arms still crossed. Maria studied the equation carefully, her mind racing. At first glance, it appeared impossibly intricate, a labyrinth of mathematical logic designed to overwhelm even the sharpest minds. But as she examined it closely, patterns began to emerge. She recalled a similar problem she'd encountered in one of the discarded textbooks her father had brought home years ago. Though the context was different, the underlying principles were strikingly familiar. Taking a deep breath, Maria began writing. Her movements were deliberate, each stroke of the marker steady and confident. She started by breaking down the equation into smaller components, isolating variables and simplifying expressions step by step. The room grew quieter as students leaned forward, intrigued despite themselves. Even Whitmore uncrossed his arms and stood straighter, his initial smirk fading into a look of mild curiosity. As Maria progressed, She introduced an innovative approach, a method she had developed during her late-night study sessions, combining elements of algebra and calculus in a way that streamlined the process. It was unconventional, yet undeniably effective. With every line she added to the board, the complexity of the equation unraveled further, revealing its elegant solution. By the time she finished, the entire room was silent, save for the soft squeak of the marker as she wrote the final answer. Maria stepped back, setting the marker down gently. She turned to face the class, her expression calm but resolute. For a moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, applause began to ripple through the room. Students clapped hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Some even stood up, cheering loudly. Maria scanned the room, her eyes meeting those of her peers. Many looked genuinely impressed, while others wore expressions of disbelief or, perhaps, shame. Whitmore, however, was utterly speechless. His earlier condescension had vanished, replaced by a mixture of shock and awe. He stared at the board, then at Maria, as if seeing her for the first time. Finally, he cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Well," he said, his voice tinged with both admiration and humility. "I must admit I underestimated you, Miss Rodriguez. That was extraordinary." Maria didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded, her gaze steady and unwavering. Then, without another word, she returned to her seat, leaving the room buzzing with excitement. For the rest of the class, Whitmore lectured with renewed energy, occasionally glancing at Maria with a newfound respect. The tension between them had shifted, replaced by something neither of them could fully articulate yet. That evening, as Maria walked back to her dorm, she replayed the scene in her mind. Part of her felt triumphant, knowing she had silenced her critics and proven her worth. But another part of her recognized that this victory wasn't just for herself. It was for everyone who had ever been doubted or dismissed because of where they came from. She thought about her father, who had always believed in her, and smiled softly. This was only the beginning. The days following Maria's extraordinary performance in Whitmore's class were a blur of emotions and reactions. News of what had happened spread quickly through the halls of Harvard, carried by whispers and excited conversations among students. By the next morning, it seemed like everyone knew about the janitor's daughter who had solved the unsolvable equation on the whiteboard. Some praised her brilliance, while others grumbled about being overshadowed. But regardless of how people felt, one thing was undeniable. Maria Rodriguez had made an impression that would not fade easily. For Maria herself, life didn't change overnight, at least not outwardly. She continued waking up early to help her father clean dorms, attended classes diligently, and spent evenings buried in books or working on assignments. Yet, there was a subtle shift in the way people treated her. Classmates who had once ignored her now greeted her warmly, sometimes even asking for help with their own work. Professors who had barely noticed her before began calling on her more frequently, curious to see if her talent extended beyond that single moment in Whitmore's class. It was both flattering and overwhelming, but Maria handled it all with quiet grace, staying focused on her goals. Professor Whitmore, however, was a different story. After Maria returned to her seat that day, he finished the lecture without another word directed at her. But as the hours passed, his demeanor changed noticeably. When class ended, instead of rushing out as usual, he lingered near the podium, watching as students filed out of the room. As Maria gathered her things to leave, he approached her hesitantly, a rare sight, given his typically authoritative presence. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his tone unusually soft. "Do you have a moment?" Maria paused, surprised by the request. For weeks, Whitmore had treated her with thinly veiled disdain, making snide remarks and doubting her abilities. Now, standing before her, he seemed almost unsure of himself. Curious but cautious, Maria nodded and followed him to a quieter corner of the lecture hall. "I owe you an apology," Whitmore began, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "My behavior toward you has been inappropriate. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I failed to recognize your potential." That was wrong of me." He paused, searching her face for a reaction. Maria simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. She hadn't expected this. Not from Whitmore, whose arrogance had seemed unshakable. "You proved me wrong today," he continued, "not just with your solution to the equation, but with your determination and creativity. You've shown qualities that are rare, even among the brightest minds here at Harvard. I want you to know that I respect that, and I'd like to support you moving forward." Maria listened carefully, weighing his words. Part of her wanted to dismiss them outright, to hold on to the anger she had felt during those first few weeks of class. But another part of her recognized sincerity when she saw it. Whitmore wasn't perfect. He was human, flawed like everyone else. And admitting fault, especially in front of someone he had wronged, must have taken considerable effort. "I appreciate your apology, Professor Whitmore," Maria replied finally, her voice calm but firm. "But actions speak louder than words. If you truly mean what you're saying, then I hope we can move forward with mutual respect, from both sides." Her response caught Whitmore off guard, but he nodded slowly, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. "Fair enough," he said. "In that case, I'd like to offer you a position as my research assistant. We're currently exploring some advanced topics in theoretical mathematics, and I believe your unique perspective could be invaluable to the project. Of course, it's entirely up to you." Maria hesitated. The offer was tempting. It was an opportunity to dive deeper into the field she loved, to learn directly from one of the most respected mathematicians in the world. But accepting it also meant working closely with someone who had doubted and belittled her. Could she set aside her pride and trust him? More importantly, could she forgive him? After a long pause, Maria spoke. "Thank you for the offer, Professor. I'll think about it and get back to you soon." Whitmore nodded, clearly understanding her need for time. They parted ways, each lost in thought. Over the next few days, Maria wrestled with the decision. She discussed it with her father, who encouraged her to focus on her dreams rather than past grievances. "This is your chance to grow, Mija," Carlos told her gently. "Don't let anyone take that away from you, not even yourself." His words resonated deeply, helping Maria clarify her thoughts. Finally, she accepted Whitmore's offer, deciding to approach the role with an open mind. Their initial meetings were awkward but productive. Whitmore assigned her tasks that challenged her intellectually, pushing her to think outside the box and explore new ideas. In return, Maria brought fresh insights to the table, often suggesting approaches that surprised even Whitmore. Over time, their professional relationship evolved into something resembling mentorship, though neither of them acknowledged it explicitly. Meanwhile, Maria's reputation continued to grow. Other professors took notice of her talent and dedication, inviting her to collaborate on projects or present her findings at academic conferences. Students sought her advice, eager to learn from someone who had proven that hard work and resilience could overcome even the toughest obstacles. Through it all, Maria remained humble, attributing her success to her father's unwavering support and her own relentless drive. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of classes and research, Maria found herself sitting alone in the library. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. She opened her laptop and began drafting an email to Whitmore, updating him on her progress with one of their ongoing experiments. As she typed, her thoughts drifted back to the journey that had brought her here, the sacrifices her father had made, the ridicule she had endured, and the countless late nights spent studying under dim lighting. Despite everything, she realized she wouldn't trade this experience for anything. Every challenge had shaped her into the person she was today, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Even Whitmore's initial hostility had taught her something valuable: the importance of proving oneself not just to others, but to oneself. As she hit send on the email, Maria leaned back in her chair and smiled softly. This was only the beginning of her story. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and triumph. But no matter what came her way, she knew she had the strength to face it head-on. After all, she had already touched the whiteboard and amazed everyone. Maria's journey at Harvard continued to unfold in ways she could never have imagined. The months that followed her groundbreaking moment in Whitmore's class were filled with growth, challenges, and moments of profound transformation, not just for Maria, but for those around her as well. As she settled into her role as Whitmore's research assistant, the dynamic between them shifted dramatically. What had once been a tense and adversarial relationship blossomed into something unexpected: mutual respect. Whitmore, though initially reluctant to admit his mistakes, proved to be a changed man in subtle yet significant ways. He began consulting Maria more frequently on complex problems, valuing her innovative approaches and fresh perspective. In return, Maria pushed herself harder than ever, determined to live up to the trust he placed in her. Together, they tackled some of the most challenging mathematical theories, often spending hours debating solutions and refining ideas. These sessions weren't always smooth. There were disagreements and moments of frustration, but they fostered a deep intellectual connection that neither of them had anticipated. Beyond their work together, Whitmore started advocating for Maria in ways that surprised even her. He recommended her for prestigious internships, introduced her to influential figures in the academic community, and encouraged her to pursue opportunities beyond Harvard. At first, Maria was skeptical, unsure if his support was genuine or merely an attempt to make amends. But over time, she realized that Whitmore's actions stemmed from a newfound belief in her potential. He saw not just a brilliant student, but someone who could redefine boundaries within mathematics, and perhaps inspire others along the way. This change in Whitmore didn't go unnoticed by his colleagues. Some admired his willingness to grow and adapt, while others whispered about how the janitor's daughter had managed to humble one of Harvard's most arrogant professors. Regardless of what people said, one thing became clear. Maria's presence had sparked a ripple effect, challenging long-held biases and forcing those around her to reconsider their assumptions about talent and privilege. Outside of her work with Whitmore, Maria continued to shine in other areas of her life. Her reputation as a gifted mathematician spread across campus, earning her invitations to speak at conferences and contribute to groundbreaking research projects. She collaborated with students and faculty from diverse fields, applying mathematical principles to solve real-world problems in medicine, engineering, and environmental science. Each success brought new confidence, reinforcing her belief that she belonged exactly where she was. But it wasn't just her academic achievements that made Maria stand out. It was her character. Despite the growing recognition she received, she remained grounded and humble, never forgetting the sacrifices her father had made to give her this chance. Every weekend, she joined Carlos in cleaning dorms, refusing to let her rising status create distance between them. They spent these hours talking about their dreams, sharing stories, and laughing like they always had. For Maria, these moments served as reminders of why she worked so hard, to honor her roots while paving a path for others like her. Her influence extended far beyond Harvard's ivy-covered walls. Inspired by her own experiences, Maria began mentoring underrepresented students, particularly those from low-income families or minority backgrounds. She organized study groups, hosted workshops, and created a peer support network aimed at helping struggling students navigate the pressures of university life. Many of these students looked up to Maria as a role model, someone who had faced similar struggles and emerged victorious. One such student was Elena Martinez, a freshman majoring in physics. Like Maria, Elena came from a working-class family and often felt out of place among her wealthier peers. When she confided in Maria about her fears of failure, Maria shared her own story, emphasizing the importance of resilience and self-belief. "You belong here, Elena," Maria told her firmly. "Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Over time, Elena grew more confident, excelling in her classes and finding her voice in discussions. Stories like hers became common, proof that Maria's impact reached far beyond equations and whiteboards. As her senior year approached, Maria reflected on how much she had grown during her time at Harvard. The shy, uncertain girl who had walked into Whitmore's classroom on her first day had transformed into a confident, accomplished young woman. Yet she knew her journey was far from over. There were still barriers to break, ceilings to shatter, and dreams to chase. And she intended to do just that. In her final semester, Maria delivered a presentation at a national mathematics conference, a culmination of years of hard work and dedication. Standing before a room filled with esteemed academics and industry leaders, she spoke passionately about her research and its potential applications. Her delivery was poised and articulate, her insights sharp and thought-provoking. By the end of her talk, the audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet in admiration. Among them was Whitmore, who watched proudly from the back of the room, knowing he had played a small part in her success. Afterward, during the networking session, Maria found herself surrounded by admirers eager to learn more about her work. One attendee, a renowned mathematician named Dr. Evelyn Carter, approached her with a warm smile. "Miss Rodriguez," Dr. Carter said, extending her hand, "your presentation was extraordinary. I've rarely seen such clarity and innovation in someone so young. Have you considered pursuing a doctorate?" Maria hesitated, caught off guard by the question. While she had dreamed of continuing her education, the idea of committing to another rigorous program felt daunting. Sensing her hesitation, Dr. Carter added, "I understand it's a big decision, but if you're interested, I'd be honored to guide you through the process. You have the potential to achieve great things." The offer left Maria speechless. Here was one of the most respected names in mathematics offering to mentor her, a testament to how far she had come. After thanking Dr. Carter profusely, Maria stepped outside to gather her thoughts. The cool evening air brushed against her face as she stared up at the stars, feeling a mix of excitement and gratitude. When she returned home that night, she sat down with her father to share the news. Carlos listened intently, his eyes shining with pride. "Mija," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder, "you've already achieved so much. Whatever you choose to do next, I know you'll succeed. Just promise me one thing." Maria looked at him curiously. "Promise me you'll keep inspiring others the way you've inspired me." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she nodded. "I promise, Papa," she whispered. "I'll never stop fighting for people like us, for everyone who's been told they don't belong." And with that promise, Maria embraced the next chapter of her journey, ready to continue breaking barriers and proving that brilliance knows no bounds. Maria's graduation day arrived like a crescendo to the symphony of her journey at Harvard. The campus was alive with excitement, banners fluttering in the breeze and proud families bustling about, cameras in hand. For Maria, this moment was bittersweet, a culmination of years of sacrifice, resilience, and unwavering determination. As she stood in line with her classmates, dressed in a cap and gown that felt both foreign and triumphant, she thought back to all the moments that had led her here, the late nights studying by candlelight, the taunts from classmates who doubted her, and the countless hours spent working alongside her father. When her name was called, Maria walked across the stage to receive her diploma, her heart pounding with emotion. The applause from the audience was thunderous, but what struck her most was the sight of her father sitting in the front row, tears streaming down his face. Carlos clapped harder than anyone else, his hands red from years of labor, now raised in celebration of his daughter's achievement. Maria locked eyes with him for a brief moment, mouthing "thank you," before turning to shake hands with the dean. In that fleeting exchange, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for her father, but for everyone who had supported her along the way. After the ceremony, Maria joined her family and friends for a small gathering near the Charles River. Laughter filled the air as loved ones shared stories and memories, marveling at how far she had come. But amidst the joy, Maria couldn't help but reflect on the broader significance of her accomplishment. She knew she wasn't just celebrating her own success. She was honoring the struggles of countless others who had paved the way for someone like her to stand where she stood today. That evening, Maria attended a reception hosted by the mathematics department. Professors, alumni, and students mingled over hors d'oeuvres, congratulating graduates on their achievements. When Professor Whitmore approached her, his expression was one of genuine admiration. "Miss Rodriguez," he began, his voice warm, "I want you to know how proud I am of everything you've accomplished. You've not only excelled academically but have inspired so many, including me." Maria smiled, touched by his words. Over the past few years, their relationship had evolved from one of tension and doubt to mutual respect and collaboration. Whitmore had become more than just a mentor. He was a testament to the power of growth and humility. "Thank you, Professor," Maria replied sincerely. "Your support has meant the world to me." As the night wore on, several people urged Maria to give an impromptu speech. Though hesitant at first, she eventually agreed, stepping up to address the crowd. Holding her glass of sparkling cider, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "When I first came to Harvard," she said, her voice steady yet filled with emotion, "I wasn't sure if I belonged here. I didn't look like most of the students, I didn't come from money, and I certainly didn't have connections. What I did have was a dream, and a father who taught me to believe in myself even when no one else did." She paused, glancing toward Carlos, who beamed proudly from across the room. "I learned quickly that intelligence isn't defined by wealth or status. It's defined by grit, curiosity, and the courage to keep going when things get tough. And while I'm incredibly grateful for my education, I'm equally aware of how lucky I am to be standing here today. There are so many talented individuals out there who never get the chance to prove themselves because of circumstances beyond their control." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement. Some wiped away tears, moved by her sincerity. Maria continued, her tone growing firmer. "That's why I've decided to dedicate my career to making education more accessible. Whether it's through teaching, mentoring, or advocating for policy changes, I want to ensure that no one is ever told they don't belong simply because of where they come from." The room erupted into applause, and Maria stepped back, feeling a mix of relief and pride. She had poured her heart into those words, knowing they represented not just her story but the stories of countless others who deserved to be heard. In the months that followed, Maria returned to Harvard, not as a student, but as a professor. Her appointment was met with widespread acclaim, particularly within communities underrepresented in academia. She became known not only for her brilliance but also for her compassion and commitment to inclusivity. Her classes were always full, drawing students eager to learn from someone who understood their struggles firsthand. One of Maria's earliest initiatives as a faculty member was establishing a scholarship fund for low-income students pursuing STEM fields. Named after her father, the Carlos Rodriguez Scholarship provided financial aid, mentorship, and resources to help recipients navigate the challenges of university life. Each year during the scholarship banquet, Maria delivered a heartfelt speech, reminding recipients that they were capable of greatness despite any obstacles they might face. Beyond her work at Harvard, Maria traveled extensively, giving lectures and workshops around the world. She spoke at schools in underserved neighborhoods, sharing her journey and encouraging young minds to pursue their passions. Her message was simple yet powerful. You don't need permission to dream big. All you need is belief in yourself and in your ability to overcome anything. Years later, Maria's legacy continued to grow. Countless students credited her with changing their lives, inspiring them to push past self-doubt and societal barriers. One former mentee, Elena Martinez, went on to earn a PhD in physics and became a leading advocate for diversity in science. Another, a shy high schooler named Miguel Torres, founded a nonprofit organization aimed at providing STEM education to marginalized communities. Even Professor Whitmore remained a steadfast ally, often collaborating with Maria on projects designed to promote equity in higher education. Their partnership served as a shining example of how growth and redemption could transform even the most unlikely relationships. On quiet evenings, Maria would sit in her office overlooking the Harvard campus, reflecting on her journey. The road had been long and difficult, but every challenge had been worth it. She thought about her father, now retired, spending his days gardening and reading the books he had once smuggled home for her. She thought about the students she had mentored, the equations she had solved, and the lives she had touched. Most of all, she thought about the future, what lay ahead not just for her but for the generations to come. Maria's story was proof that brilliance could shine brightest in the unlikeliest of places. It was a reminder that talent knows no boundaries, and that sometimes all it takes is touching the whiteboard and believing in yourself to change everything.